Hi, Artful Priestess sisters. This is Lee, and I'm here with one of my best friends, Nala Walla. We are here in the Queen of Death moon to introduce juicy concepts about grief and ancestors. I've been so inspired by Nala these last couple years because she's really been inviting in the concept of death and growing old and becoming an elder and welcoming in these concepts of ancestral connection and our mortality very close to her heart. And you've been inspiring me with what you've been sharing, and more deeply how you've been walking, bringing all of these concepts in and walking your life, changing the walk of your life. So I thought it'd be great to hear from the ground up about this evolution you've been on, befriending grief and connecting with your ancestors.
Yeah. Okay. So before we start, I just want to offer a prayer first, because these topics are so critically important to our survival as a species. You know, it really, the stakes are high for this type of information to really go out in a mainstream, distribution. So I just want to call upon the ancient ones, the wellness in my lineage and in your lineage, Lee, and also the wellness in all of your lineages, all of you who are watching. We all come from grounded, healthy, wise, kind, earth-honoring people somewhere back in our lineage. Even though we may not be able to fully remember it right at this moment, we would not be here unless you, ancestors, were wise and kind and loving. And so I ask that those energies be here, present with us to guide this conversation, so that people can receive this information and talk about it regularly. That means I'm calling in one of my ancient languages of Hebrew that's in my lineage, that unfortunately I don't speak other than a couple of prayers, but I'm just trying to make that connection to you, ancestors, so that you show up. I also say, Babcha Jadkuva, Dobcha Faduchu, Pomosik Mosok I Świętek Isotach. I'm speaking to you in Polish, ancestors, just so that your ears come alive and your wellness can be present with us and guide us today in this conversation. So may it be. Amen. Klahoya. Thank you.
Aho.
Oh, I forgot something in my prayer, and that's also the ancestors of this land in the Pacific Northwest where we're at, whose goal of healing is aligned with my own ancestors, but my own wise ancestors. May those forces join, and may what we talk about here be a blessing to this land. Thank you to this land.
Yeah, thank you. Nala, thank you for being here. Your journey with befriending your own grief, from my vantage, led you to this profound, deep, and very real, tangible relationship with your ancestors. Let's start today by hearing a little bit about your story. Like, what called you to grief work, and then what did it feel like to start doing grief work?
Well, when I look back on it now, I've actually been involved in grief and ancestor work for a long time as a performer. You know, I always, my mom said that I had casts on my legs when I was a little girl, because I was actually born club-footed. And my mom said as soon as the casts came off my legs that I was just like dancing, like constantly dancing. So I've always known that movement was a huge part of my healing. And I ended up doing a lot of formal dance training and performing in, you know, more formal stages. And, you know, as I got into my 20s and my political consciousness was awakening in me, it just didn't feel right. I knew that I should be moving and be dancing. That felt right. But the places that I was doing it in just felt like, this is weird. This doesn't feel right. And as I look back on it now, my urge to perform, because I went on to study a lot of improv and then did a lot of, you know, street performance and place-based performances. So going out to a beautiful spot on the beach, or doing a lot of Day of the Dead type ceremonies in a cemetery with beautiful dances is a way of inviting my ancestors to come to be present. And I didn't specifically know I was doing that, but I always was moved toward it, just pulled there. Mm-hmm. So only in, you know, hindsight, after I've studied ancestor work formally and been doing a lot of studying of grief work, do I realize, oh, that's where all this is coming from. So everything is really, really coming together now. But I would say, in terms of really focusing on grief work consciously, as that's exactly what I'm doing, I would say in the last 5 years. And that was precipitated by the death of my mother. My mom got really sick and we were very close. And I was initially drug into that world kicking and screaming. You know, I remember one time as my mom was in her final days, just the pain of that was so intense. And I was out in my bathtub, which is outside in our garden, which you may know from a previous interview about like permaculture and things. But I was out in my bathtub, and suddenly I realized that I forgot how to breathe. I had this sensation, not of asthma, that I couldn't, you know, that there was something in my lungs, but that I forgot how to take a breath. You know, and I thought, isn't this something that I'm supposed to do automatically? Like, why do I have to think about breathing? And I started to panic, you know, and luckily there was this huge windstorm while I was in the bathtub, and it was starting to rain. So it was very loud outside, and out of nowhere, this wail came out of my mouth, like loud. And I felt, usually I would have felt so self-conscious about wailing, because, you know, in our current society, you learn that if you wail, the police are going to show up and take you to the institution. So you don't, you know, or you maybe might get in your car and scream. I think that's pretty common experience for people when they can't hold it in anymore. Or it just ends up in violence or a brawl in a bar or in your, you know, domestic violence. Or, yeah, it's really sad that we are taught to clamp down on those really natural vocalizations, especially when someone's dying. But all through life, you have reasons that make you want to just, well. So anyway, in the bathtub, I had no choice, and it just, huge sound started coming out of me, and the wind protected me, because I knew the neighbors wouldn't hear anything because it was so loud outside. So I was feeling it, and suddenly I was breathing. Whoa! Yeah. Oh my it's like my body was like, I refuse to breathe until you wail.
Until you breathe.
Yes. So boy, that was really, you know, I'll never forget that. It was, probably the initiation moment into formal understanding that yes, grief work is what I need to be doing right now, and then it became a life's path. Sure.
We've known each other for 10 years, and I have also danced with you for a very long time and culture with you, and we're comfortable with our bodies together as sisters and friends. And so from maybe an outside point of view, just within our relationship, there's been a sense of comfort and deep family, deep sisterhood. We've taken showers together, we've garden naked together, we've skinny dipped together at the beach. And isn't it interesting that for at least 3/4 of our friendship, we really had never grieved together. Like maybe I would cry if I was upset, or you would cry, and we'd, support each other like in friendship.
Right.
But even seemingly being so comfortable with each other, the skill set of grieving in a very alternative, we're very alternative in our mindset. The skill set of grieving wasn't really there. Yeah, it wasn't in place. And there was, for me, you brought up the self-consciousness. Like, even being very comfortable in my body, I still wasn't like, I was very self-conscious about my grieving, and I was very clamped down.
Yeah.
I feel like through our friendship, that natural ability to grieve has been invited out of me, and it feels something that's like one of my skill sets now. I feel comfortable doing it, just like I do peeing and pooping and eating. It feels necessary. But will you speak about what like a grief lodge looks like, what grieving has looked like for you, and that transition of when you hadn't been doing it at all to when you started doing it?
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm way more comfortable than I used to be, it still is, I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface in many ways. And, I've done a lot of intensive grief work in the last 5 years. But because we've been raised not only in during my lifetime in an extremely repressed society when it comes to grief, all the polite, the things we do at a company, in polite company rather, and the things we don't do in polite company, that's deep in our acculturation, and it's also deep in my parents' acculturation and their parents, and who knows how far that goes back. So I get the sense that even though I'm much more comfortable with it now, and if you think of it at grief as a muscle that is just like any muscle becomes atrophied, flaccid and limp, and you almost don't even know how to access it. It's numb if you don't use it. And so I've just started to flex those muscles, and I feel them getting stronger. And so I know as I keep working that will continue to happen. But I imagine, what was it like in my ancient past? What I can only have like a glimmer of what it was actually like to feel things really able to move through my body, all the emotions that they come, and that they have a place in my culture that's honored, where it's not, oh, you're having a hard time. Well, you don't do that in here. Go off, and when you feel better, come back and join us. Where you're isolated and exiled if you are having a hard time, because you don't want to be bring everyone else down. You don't want to be a wet blanket. Those type of, unspoken rules. I was just thinking about this with some friends were visiting me the other day, and I learned that a friend is pregnant, and she has been telling people that she's pregnant since right away. And a few of her friends were like, you can't tell people baby might not hold, you got to wait till that 3-month mark before you start making the announcement. And that's kind of like a common like rule in our current society that's very related to what we're talking about, because the first trimester in a woman's pregnancy is often very emotional. You might be really, really sick. Your whole world is completely changing. Your hormones are soaring, and you might not be a lot of fun to be around. You might be extremely weepy. Your personality might be completely changed. And so I remember that happening to me. I was very, very nauseous. And that was hard because I'm used to getting stuff done, I was just laid out in my hammock. And I remember not being able to tell people, that people would come over, or I'd be out and about, and I was just like crumbled in the corner, and people were just like, well, what's up with her, but I couldn't say anything. And then finally a friend of mine said, you don't have to, why don't you tell people? Like, they need to know your friends need to know what's going on with you.
Yeah.
And then you can get sympathy,
totally.
And support. Yeah. So finally I was like, it was like this huge load that was lifted off my shoulders once I finally started telling people. And I was way less nauseous, actually, because part of like holding that fear and, just the turmoil that I was going through, holding it in was making me sick. And so it's very related to that when you're going through similar experiences, when you're having some type of major life transition or a death or some type of initiation or any kind of struggle in this life, which is I said everyone has. I don't know if you can hear whispers. That we share those things with each other. That to live in a culture like that, the way our ancestors did, I'm barely even getting a taste of it. So I guess that's all to say. I think we're still at the beginning. We have a long way to go, and it feels so good to be going in this direction, for sure.
Yeah. The grief lodges that you now help to facilitate and co-create in our community, what is the bones of that ceremony? What is it?
Yeah, so the idea is that when we use the word lodge, it means a shelter for our, our fledgling grief muscles, as we're talking about them, to develop. So we gather in, probably 20, 30 people. I think you could do it with fewer. It's not that you have to have a certain number, but usually it's been about 20 to 30 people in this beautiful round space. Also not required, but it's a geodesic dome that's had a lot of beautiful ceremony happen on this land. And we gather, we pass the talking stick, we share some poems. Everyone shares a little bit about what brought them there. And it's pretty simple. Then we break up into smaller groups. We get some more focused time to really tell our stories with a smaller group. And there are songs shared as well. All of these are basically technologies. Lawrence calls them, my teacher Lawrence calls them technologies of belonging. So belonging to your back in your body, feeling at home there, feeling at home with your community. So if we think of in any given room of 20 people, there's rich, there's poor, there's black, there's white, there's old, there's young. We all have different life experiences, but that's something that levels the playing field. We all are experiencing grief, especially these days. There's so many crazy things going on in our lives and in the world that everyone alive is experiencing grief, and we all have that in common. And that's why Marti calls grief in his village, he describes it as the glue of the community. That at any feast, he says the dessert are tears. We eat tears for dessert, and there's laughing, and then there's crying, and there's laughing, and there's, it just celebrates the full spectrum of being alive. So, rather than saying it feels good, you feel alive, and when we shut down our grief, then we shut down our joy. I don't like that feeling of just feeling like I can only exist within this very narrow range of my human experience. I want to be able to feel things. So in our culture, which has been very dissociated from feeling, coming together in this ritual, so I'll go on to describe it, where after we have talked a little bit about why we're there, the meat of the ritual starts to happen when we build a beautiful shrine out of, in this area, it's cedar and fir boughs and flowers and ferns, and we light candles, and there are a bunch of mats set out. So when people feel a wave of, they might feel sorrow or anger or frustration or just joy, you can get down on the mat and just crumble, or you can dance, or you can just wail. You can get a shot at feeling what it's like to actually scream. I did that just had a grief lodge, which are so rich because this time of the year, it's, the ancestors, they say the veil is much thinner, so ancestors are more present, they're more supportive. It feels really right to do a wailing lodge at this time of year, especially. So I got down on the mat at one point, and there's this really interesting phenomenon of where I'm not necessarily feeling it right at that moment. But if I just get down on all fours and I start moving my body and just letting out a loud sound, my body goes, oh, okay, it's time. And then it remembers. It's kind of like priming the pump, like things going to flow. So you just move some liquid through, and then it starts coming. So I just started yelling. I have never yelled that loud in my entire life. It was amazing. My jaw went into a position that I think unlocked itself, and I started feeling this tingling sensation going all up and down my ears and my neck and my face, and I was like, why haven't I done this sooner? This feels so amazing. This feels so necessary, and I would never have necessarily known that I needed to do that I was clenching my jaw. We're taught to be so outside of our bodies. So again, I have a long way to go, but I know I feel that this is on the right track for my body, and given what I've heard from others as well, people are getting so much out of the grief lodge. So I think that this type of lodges, I first went to one about an hour away from here, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't travel. I need to this lodge. I need to start one in our own community. And so I'm just hoping that they're just going to seed all over the place. Because not only do we need them in every state, we need them in every town, every neighborhood, even. They're truly revolutionary. Truly, it's an activist practice, and it's super, super radical and needed right now in these times. People have a lot that we're carrying, and we can barely function, holding all of that in isolation. So coming together in community allows us to witness each other and be real, hear the things that people are carrying. This woman's son has been autistic, and the daily struggle of that, for me to hear it, for me to hear about the addictions and the suicides and all the losses that are happening all around me in my community, I'm like, wow, you know, you'd never know when you see people walking around, what they're actually carrying. And they don't need to carry it alone. And, that's where we all take a little bit, and also our ancestors also help. They know how to transform that energy of burden into vitality, into life, in ways that we don't need to understand. They know how to do it. We don't need to know how they do it, but it happens. So all of the lodge ends up being, this moist offering, giving those beautiful fluids that have been trapped in our bodies for not only our own lifetimes, but probably several generations. Um, I'd like to talk more about that. I think we'll get to it, but just about the new discoveries that they're making in epigenetics and brain research about intergenerational trauma and memory, how it really does travel through the generations.
Sure.
It's not just like it's not just lip service of saying, oh, this is left over from past lives. I mean, you hear a lot about people talking about past lives, and what does that even mean? It's become, just lingo at this point for many people. But what the science is actually there to show now that, that memory and traumas are indeed encoded into the egg and sperm and passed on to us. I mean, it also comes through stories and through culture and, things like that. It comes through mannerisms of your parents and things like that, but it's also actually encoded into your genes. So I'd like to bookmark that topic for a second. I'll come back to it just to finish up talking about the grief lodge, that it ends up being a ritual that it's not only, you don't do it so that you feel better. You might come there thinking in a way, oh, I'll do this because it's therapeutic, but really what's happening is that we are changing the way that our children are going to understand what to do with their emotions. And we're also helping repair what our ancestors never were able to deal with. So much more is going on than just, I'm going to do this so that I can be free of a burden. Once you start doing that work, you start realize, I'm doing this because it feels right, first of all, but I'm doing this because it's part of my responsibility of being alive on this planet right now, is to become open to some of the currents that were blocked off for my recent ancestors. So yeah, it's a simple technology, a grief lodge or a wailing lodge, a grief ritual, whatever you want to call it. The one that I've been participating in comes from Maladoma and Sobonfu Some, who are from Burkina Faso, and they were tasked by their medicine people there to come to this country and offer this simple, framework, because their elders said, what did they do? And they described what it was like in this country. We're in the US, US of A. They said, oh, I see, people don't know how to grieve. So this was a huge gift that was, was a seed for these to start happening. So there's quite a few here and there happening on the West Coast, and they're kind of starting on the East Coast of the United States. And I don't know what's happening in Europe. I would hope that they're starting up in Europe as well. I would imagine here and there. But hopefully you all who are watching this will get the message and seek them out, or I'd be happy to help. Yeah. And also Frances Weller is a psychotherapist and grief tender in California that's done a lot he wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is absolutely wonderful. And so I do actually some book groups on that book, as well as Stephen Jenkinson's book, I Wise. Really, really amazing grief worker people that are, yeah, we're very lucky to have them alive and still teaching right now. Sabanfu Some had died a few years ago. Maladoma is still alive. Just really grateful to them. I wonder if they know how deeply people are moved all over this country and elsewhere. I hope you know. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's remarkable what one person or a couple people, what waves they can make out into the world. It's refreshing to remember that, because oftentimes it feels the opposite to me. What can I possibly even do to make some semblance of sanity in this world right now? Like, oh, look at the great teachers whose backs we stand upon, in a sense, who are bolstering us up and helping to provide these ideas of grace, of remembering. Nala, I wanted to share with everyone out here, because sisters may not have access to a grief circle this month or over the course of the next years, depending on where they live. And I thought it'd be fun to plant some ideas of how you can just initiate and normalize some grief work without having a ceremony to do it within. So I know you and I both have some type of practice of going out into nature and like burying our faces in the soil and yelling and crying, or curling up within a tree's roots and crying. And can we just like popcorn some ideas? Because a lot of this, like you said, is priming the pump. It's like really cool to hear about people talk about it and help you realize that this process is okay. And then you kind of think about it and, okay, I'm going to try that out. And then it's basically just like trying it. Mm-hmm. And it may not look like what it looks like, what you think it's going to look like, or you may be totally primed for it with something happening in your life and you're just like getting yourself out the door to let the tears flow. But what are some other ways that we can start introducing grief, welcoming grief back into our lives?
Well, nature is a great recycler. So that tension, that burden that we carry, as you mentioned, to go out to a place. You don't have to go out to some pristine forest, even just a tree that you feel resonant with. Going down to the ocean or the lake and, whispering some type of prayer or weeping. I like to think of my tears as sacred. And I had received this idea of when I'm weeping, catching my tears in a bowl and putting them on my altar as an offering. But you can also do that, catching your tears on a stone and then throwing it into the lake or the river or the type of body of water. The fluids have a resonance for other fluids. Mm-hmm. So that's just making these simple ritual tasks for oneself to basically make beauty out of what we think of as something that's horrific or ugly, or to make it into something beautiful where you offer it, and think about whose tears might you be crying. You're crying your own tears, but to some extent, you're also crying tears for all those who've experienced some type of loss, or betrayal, or these type of things. You're not the first human to experience them. So making them into some type of offering that connects you with others. So it's about creating relationality and connectiveness out of something that was formerly isolated and disconnected. So I've heard that. I've heard you say digging a hole and putting your face in the soil and crying into that. I love to put my face in soil and then smell that hummus smell is just so delicious and so calming. So nature is a great teacher. You can also take a friend with you. That's more of a risky for some people, but can you imagine how honored if you were to ask a friend, can you come out with me to the ocean and help dunk me in the water and create a ritual where I can really release my tears, for example, or my rage. Do you have any other ideas too? Well, you were saying popcorn, so
yeah, I can popcorn, and what's actually calling me to share right now is I'm realizing the connection of grieving or creating space to grieve or inviting a friend to grieve. I'm realizing the connection that has with exercising the muscle of your own self-worth. Mm-hmm. They feel connected. Definitely. And it's like you have to start really getting to know the places inside of yourself where you're like, I honor my existence. I respect myself. Right? I'm going to create this time to do this. I'm going to invite a friend into this kind of unknown territory and somehow create an experience that will be meaningful because I value myself. And if that part is missing or hasn't been well practiced, this other part could also be hard. Resistance could come in, trying to get out there and grieve. So it's interesting how the grief work also helps strengthen the muscle of self-honor.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you bring up that particular topic because this gets into this idea of ancestor work. So when I started to grieve, at times I would face what I was feeling in my body and feel, this is so huge. I will never be done with this. Like, where is this coming from? And, I did have a lot of trauma in my childhood, but still I could get the sense that this goes way beyond my own life. And then I realized, oh, ancestors, right? Oh, hi. Haven't talked to you guys in a while.
My entire life.
Like my entire life, and probably many generations, because cultural disintegration, smashing of indigenous cultures has happened in all of our lineages. So we see this happening currently on the soil that we live on. The native people here have been just pounded by colonialism, by settlers in the last 200 years, 300 years in this culture. But in the case of indigenous Europeans, it happened a couple thousand years ago, several thousand years ago. So over that many generations, the colonization becomes more and more thorough. And that is what it is known as whiteness. Whiteness, as you probably have figured out, is not actually a race. It's not actually a skin color. Like my skin actually isn't even white. It's kind of like pinkish brown, so is yours. So people who are known as white people, what that means is a bleaching of our cultural ways. So when we think about what our cultures were, all earth honoring indigenous cultures practice connection with their ancestors. And I don't just mean that some shaman or medicine man goes on a journey and connects. I'm talking about every single person in their everyday life walks with their ancestors and has ways of talking with people. So if you think about the way we talk in English, when someone dies, we say, I lost my mother. She's passed. She's gone. You know, Stephen Jenkinson has a little funny, a humorous bit about, if you lost your wallet and your keys, you'd probably look for them. You'd probably be like, I'm so careless. Like, what did I do with my keys? And you'd give it a good shot to find them. And if you didn't find them, you'd just be like, gosh, I just really need to pay more attention. You'd get down on yourself. You'd be upset. But we just lost our mother. And so it's basically, don't lose your mother. Don't lose your ancestors. The fact that we have lost our ancestors is evidence of the deep colonization that has happened for white people and generally modern people, where our natural instinct to just speak with our ancestors who are on the other side of the mystery to find ways of keeping that connection alive has been shamed, broken. If you talk with dead people, you must be the devil. You know, that is to decolonize our relationship with our own dead is a hugely activist practice that I'm, you don't have to become like a famous healer or shaman or something like that to actually help. Each of us that does that work is like significant. There's some water over there. Thank you. Really significant contribution to activism. And so when we were talking before about these rituals, the reason that type of ritual where you would say, go by yourself down to the lake and whisper to the stones, the reason that works is because, again, you are becoming relational with your ancestors, with all those who have experienced similar things, with the deities and the spirits that are in that beautiful place where you're at. So it's all about reconnecting and becoming more enmeshed in community. So even if you're alone, I mean, you're never really alone, to consider that as I'm coming into community and feeling myself more connected. You go into, I do this practice called ancestral medicine, which is a way of repairing some of the damage that we're talking about that's happened within our lineages. And it's essentially a meditation practice where you visualize your, you can say pick one lineage at a time, and especially in the beginning, just, okay, I'm working on my mother's people, or others people, and you are able to start to address some of the woundings that were never properly grieved. And so that during that meditation process, even though you could be by yourself or with a practitioner who's helping to guide you, you are still widening your sense of relationality. And that's where the healing comes in. It's all about reconnecting with each other, the living, dead, and our future, our future ancestors, and this is also where the topic of epigenetics comes back into play. It's so inspiring and so heartening to get these studies that are coming in where, of course, indigenous people and just intuitive people and moms have been saying this for years, that what happened to your grandma of course, is affecting you right now. I mean, you have the very basic, you know, um, anatomical situation where when a woman is pregnant with a female child, one of the first things that develop, you probably know this, are the eggs. So the eggs of that third generation are pregnant in are present rather in the pregnant mother. So in my case, my grandmother was experiencing terrorism, pogroms, war, looting, burning, rape, pillage, all of that in her village in Poland. The genetic material that is me was there, literally was there. So that's just basic to our anatomy, that we're really connected to grandmothers, especially women. And I mean, it's the eggs that became male children as well were there. So it's not only women, but they did some study that I just recently read about with mice. I just get chills because just the idea of testing mice is horrific, but they're still doing that. I think it's because mice share a huge percentage of our genetic material with humans, something like 90% similar in our genes. But their generations live out in 6 weeks rather than, a lifetime is like 60 years or something for a human. So they're able to make these studies. And what they did was it's so hard to talk about. Okay, but they subjected these mice to electric shocks, and at the same time they put in a fragrance, gardenias, I think it was. And then they found that the grandchildren of those mice would smell gardenias and they would suddenly go into a fear response. So it's not only that you would inherit some type of, for those of us who are Jewish, there's the stereotypical neurotic Jew. Well, now you see why, because over thousands of years, as you're hammering the nervous system, basically, where you're always being scapegoated and attacked and exiled, and that of course is going to shape your body over time. But so not only would your kind of physical traits passed through the genome, through the epigenome, but also memory, like actual memory. I don't know, and they don't know how exactly the mechanism works, but this is why we have to start working on looking at what happened in Europe for those of us who do have European heritage, what happened in Africa, what happened right now when there's mass genocide going on and people being forced to migrate. And that's what happened when a lot of immigrants came and settled this country. They were in a very traumatized state. People don't just pick up and go somewhere, leave everything they know behind. They were running, they were in very desperate positions. And it's very traumatic to leave your homeland, and only the most dire of circumstances could make somebody buy a ticket on a boat where you don't even know if you'll survive the boat ride. And who knows what's going to happen once you get to this place. You're not going to be speaking your language anywhere. You're going to be forbidden to speak your language. Everything stolen from you. You don't know where your people are. Your families are split up. This is what happened to people all over Europe when they came to this country. And it's never been grieved, because as people arrived here, their cultures were destroyed as well. And so the mechanisms that they would have had in place to transform a trauma and settle the nervous system back down so that it's not passed on to our children, that's called settling and switching off the stress genes in your genome. That's what these grief, these cultural methods, and their technologies really of taking trauma that is going to like freeze into your genome and turning those genes off and moving things back into peace and centeredness and harmony again. Those mechanisms and those cultural technologies were obliterated, and so they've been carried and passed on through the genome to us. And now we're here talking to you right now. I mean, this is an amazing technology that our ancestors never had to connect with one another and realize what has happened, and to have all these amazing science at our fingertips on the internet to be able to say, oh, I see, what we need to do is restore some of our grief work and restore our ways that we connect with our ancestors and actually heal them. So with the ancestral medicine process that I've learned from a teacher named Daniel Thor, there's a few basic principles that you work with. One of them is that there's some continuity of consciousness after death, that things are transferred. And so through epigenetics, we know that that's true, even on a genetic level, never mind a metaphysical level. There's also some type of continuity of consciousness. One of the other principles is that just because someone dies doesn't mean that they automatically become an ancestor. So it's quite possible for someone to die in a state, as people do commonly these days. They die in a fog of painkillers and sedatives and chemotherapy drugs and God knows what else. So I like to talk about, if you were to give those type of drugs to a baby right before they're going to be born, there's a very good chance that they would never be born. And so it's that's what happens, is people die and they're in a state of fragmentation and injury and confusion, and they didn't have relationships perhaps with their own ancestors. There wasn't proper ceremony done when they're born, when they died. And so they're in this limbo land, and they kind of don't know how to leave this realm and go to the realm of the ancestors. I don't pretend to know what the realm of the ancestors is or looks like. It's a great mystery, but we do know that you can sense that there's a difference between an ancestor and a ghost, and so not all the dead are equally well, is something that Daniel would say. And that the dead and the living actually have a very strong influence on one another. And that the dead can change. And the beauty of it is that they can change readily. So as soon as we turn our attention toward them, there is a lot more to this, and I would be happy to work with different of you. I do ancestral medicine sessions, and they're quite potent, and they're quite simple in many ways. It's wonderful. But this is basically being shown through the epigenetic research that you can turn off those genes of stress and confusion and fragmentation. Yeah. No, so it's like both terrifying that we're inheriting all that stuff, and also so empowering, because there is everything that we can do about it. And it's simple. All we need to do is to work with it, which means meditation, visualization, ritual. And these are the things that you all are studying. This is really, really hopeful. We can make a lot of change in a very small amount of time. My experience with my own ancestors is that as soon as I was like open my ears to think that this is possible, that like, oh, you exist, you're not gone. So humbling, as soon as I turned toward my ancestor, they were like, hi, thank you. Like, it's been a while since any of our family has like gotten in touch. They're just so willing and ready to help. It's exciting. It's exciting, and it can happen way more readily than you might think, because it's another part of our cultures. We're taught like it's going to be a slog, it's going to take like 20 years of therapy, you know,
Totally.
like it's going to be awful. It's actually quite nourishing. It's quite wonderful, you know, and as is grief work, you know, paradoxically. So we call it the grief and gratitude lodge, because by the end of the night, people look 10 years younger. I'm not kidding.
Totally.
I mean, you just look at people's faces and they're all like kind of dewy and glowing, and people feel like, oh, I didn't know that could happen. Everyone's like really bonded in the room, and you just feel like, oh, okay, I feel really grateful to be alive. And that's how this work is. It's not the slog of psychotherapy where you just like go into the trauma over and over again and you just like sit in it. You know, it's like, that's not helpful, and it's not how people heal. So my teacher wrote a book called Ancestral Medicine, which is has some exercises in it that are helpful. You can also you know, just get support from a number of practitioners, myself, or there's I don't know, there's a whole list of practitioners on the website that might be in your area if you want to work in person with someone. But it also is it's completely fine to work on the phone or on a video. It works really, really well. So I can definitely offer myself in that way if you want to try. Yeah.
Looking at the time. Oh gosh. Okay.
Have we been blabbing?
Well, no, we could blab for hours,
Yeah.
and I love it. But I know your son's coming back, and life is moving on.
Yeah.
I just want to share about you for a moment, because we'll share Nala's website, and so you can kind of see her in the digital format. But Nala is one of the most generous, open-hearted women I've met. And so if any of this is pinging you, her email's on her website. You can email her. She will write you back personally. She will call you and talk if you're interested in pursuing support. And then also Nala has built this incredible 5-acre homestead that is really a sanctuary. And there are beautiful little buildings that she's built where she welcomes people on to have more of an immersive experience in just unplugging from life and deeply connecting. And so if there's something in you that says that I might want to fly out to Washington and visit Lee and spend time with Nala, there's possibility here. And that's what Nala's entire life has been dedicated to. And her homestead is beautiful. So please do reach out to Nala if any of this speaks to you. And she's, really dedicated to making things work and ultimately supporting one another as women.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. We built this. Lee was part of building this earthen hut. It's a little sanctuary that is, it's all non-toxic because it's just clay and straw and sand. But what I tell people is that it's detoxic. It's more than non-toxic. There's 8 tons of clay in that building. So even just being in there, other than all the good grief work and somatic work that we do in there, it's also just physically detoxing you. Plus, if you work with me, you know that I am also a nutritionist, so I serve amazing bone broth made with the herbs from my garden. So, and then we do ritual down on the beach, and so it's quite an experience, a holistic type of healing experience, as you said, and an immersion, an immersive detox. Yeah. So you can see more details and just learn more about my work at bewellnow.org, which is just the letter B, well.org.
Bewellnow.org. Yeah. And we'll post that below too.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a woman who views the initiations and challenges and deep sorrows and confusions in your life and courts them with curiosity. And you never stop choosing the learning path.
Thank you.
Yes, you are becoming a beautiful elder, even though you're still really so much in your mother years. And I honor and respect you so deeply. And I'm so blessed to call you my friend.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. You also are just seeing you ripen into someone who's really just not afraid to really engage with life. Life is not easy, and you just like you're facing it square on. So I see that happening in you, and as you're ripening. It's weird when this many years go by and you just know someone from when they were basically a little kid, and now you're like a full-on woman.
Yes,
full-on woman.
You did meet me when I was kind of like a kid.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the most powerful things that I feel like we're doing here together in this temple is reconnecting women. Sometimes it's through cyberspace, sometimes it's within the local community, but our entire culture, our entire earth is rejuvenated by us reconnecting together.
Important work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for listening.